Said that I did hear a little about it. I don't have too many details, but I didn't raise this with Prime Minister Modi. But all I can say is that he's done a lot of good work when it comes to religious freedom, and he's very happy and satisfied about the work the Prime Minister has done. So that certainly is going to go a long way as a vote of confidence for the Prime Minister, especially at this uncomfortable time for him.
That was the BBC's Arandohe Mukherjee in Delhi. Hosni Mubarak, who ruled Egypt for 30 years, has died in hospital in Cairo, aged 91. Mubarak was overthrown by the Arab Spring protests of 2011. He was tried and found guilty of complicity in the killing of protesters during that uprising. He was later acquitted after the Egyptian military returned to power. Caroline Hawley has this.
Hosni Mubarak was thrust by violence into the leadership of the Arab world's most populous country. It was October 1981, and Hosni Mubarak was beside President Anwar Sadat as he was assassinated at an army parade. Stability became the watchword of his rule, at a cost, says democracy activist George Ishaq.
Stability by force, stability by police, stability by don't let the people express themselves.
Hosni Mubarak was born in a small village in the Nile Delta and rose to become commander of Egypt's Air Force, which he helped rebuild after it was destroyed by Israel in the 1967 war, a massive humiliation for a proud nation. He was later to maintain the peace treaty signed between Egypt and Israel in 1978, although it was unpopular at home and earned him the ire of Islamist extremists.
The shots started about 10 o'clock or 10:15. People ran to the tombs because we didn't know where the shots were coming from, and we saw one soldier run over an adjoining hill with his gun drawn.
The massacre of 58 people in Luxor in 1997 was the deadliest of a string of Islamist attacks that threatened the country's lucrative tourist industry. A crackdown followed, but it was not only the violent extremists who suffered from the repression of the regime. Members of the largest opposition group, the Muslim Brotherhood, were frequently put in jail, where torture was common. The intelligence services were pervasive. Criticism from human rights groups was routine. But to the West, Egypt under Hosni Mubarak was a key ally, a voice of moderation on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
The United States and Egypt have worked together closely for many years. And for many of those years, President Mubarak has been a leader and a counselor and a friend to the United States.
That friendship earned Egypt $2 billion a year from the US, mostly in military aid. But many of its people were living in poverty. The country was mired in corruption and weighed down by unemployment. Egyptians felt stripped of dignity. And it was no longer mainly the Muslim Brotherhood opposing Hosni Mubarak's long rule. A new internet-savvy generation was demanding change. In January 2011, inspired by the revolution in Tunisia, Egypt erupted in protest. Egyptians en masse defying the police state, demanding that Hosni Mubarak step aside. People had shaken off their fear. Blood was shed, but the protesters stood their ground.
لقد طلبت من الحكومة التقدم باستقالتها اليوم.
President Mubarak sacked his government and in a series of special addresses made concession after concession, every one of them too little too late. The protests continued. The regime had lost all remnants of legitimacy. But even the night before he gave up power, Hosni Mubarak's final speech gave no indication he was ready to go.
I worked for Egypt, progress and the progress of its people. My aim was never to seek a false and fake power. I believe that the majority of Egyptian people know who is Hosni Mubarak, and it pains me what has been expressed by some people from my own country.
The next day, on February the 11th, 2011, he stepped aside. he was put on trial for complicity in the deaths of hundreds of demonstrators. A frail, sick man wheeled into a cage in court on a stretcher. Hosni Mubarak was convicted and sentenced to life in jail. But he appealed, and, under the regime of a new military-backed leader, his conviction was overturned. There were protests, but in March 2017, Hosni Mubarak was released from military hospital to go home, having already served a 3-year term for embezzling public funds. For a man often portrayed in power as a latter-day pharaoh, it was a humiliating end.
Caroline Hawley reporting. Well, joining me now is Mohammed Sultan, an Egyptian human rights advocate and co-founder of the Freedom Initiative. Mohammed, what's your reaction to Hosni Mubarak's death?
Well, thank you for having me. I mean, it definitely unearths a mixture of feelings, nostalgia for the revolution that saw Mubarak toppled, 30 years of dictatorship that kind of rotted Egypt at its core with poverty, injustice, police crackdowns, and just kind of paving the way for where we are now. That's kind of, so a mixture of a lot of these feelings, and kind of a little bit of a renewed sense of anger that the kind of justice that the generation of January 25th will never see served in this world.
You were imprisoned, weren't you, after the coup in 2013, soon before Mubarak was acquitted. You have reasons to be bitter.
Yeah, I mean, and it's very, very interesting kind of seeing Mubarak get a military funeral, 3 days of official mourning, and kind of this treatment, this full treatment of a former head of state, not an ousted one. All of which, I mean, as you know, Holly just had in her report, this, you know, the independent judiciary had sentenced this man to 3 years in prison for embezzlement. I mean, this is the type of contradictions that we see. This is one of the branches of power in Egypt has deemed this man a criminal, someone who embezzled public funds, and this man gets this sort of treatment, while, you know, there's this sort of double standard with people that are dying in prison and are made to be buried in the middle of the night. My friend Aya Hijazi actually just tweeted out a little bit ago, which I thought was right on, just hit it right on the head. She said, even in death, there's a class system. This class system, and it's so perfect because it represents everything Mubarak was about, this kind of disappearing of the middle class in Egypt that he and his cronies played a huge part in as they kind of embezzled and really just corrupted Egypt at its core and stripped it of its resources, all to their personal benefit and interest. But yeah, I mean, it's bitter. I don't know if the word is bitter, but just a mixture of a lot of feelings, that's for sure.
And very briefly, in a phrase really, does his rule, his dictatorship, as you called it, look more benign beside today's military rule in Egypt?
Most definitely. And it only the nostalgia for his rule that people are, that people feel, and this kind of revisionist view of his legacy only emerged because of how ruthless Sisi is in his dictatorship, that Mubarak was just smarter in his repression. He was less ruthless than to Egyptians than Sisi is. But let's not rewrite history
Thank
here.
you.
Mubarak was one of the worst dictators of his time.
Mohammed Sultan, Egyptian human rights advocate.
This is the BBC World Service, looking at how Germany is reconciling its past.
This year commemorates 75 years since the end of the Second World War. In Germany, a powerful culture of remembrance has emerged.
As much as we all digitize things and only live in front of our screens, the power of the actual place where something happened will never vanish.
You can listen to Germany, Justice and Memory and many of our other stories at bbcworldservice.com/documentaries. And in 10 minutes, People Fixing the World looks at safe online forums for LGBT plus people in the Middle East.
I used to struggle with depression and addiction, but after I joined the site, I met the most wonderful friends who helped me find myself again.
And that's followed by World Business Report. Now, though, it's back to Paul Henley and NewsHour.
And a reminder of our top story this hour, the coronavirus continues to spread globally. Italy, which has seen the highest number of cases in Europe, confirmed the first case in its south, while in Iran, the deputy health minister has tested positive for the virus. World Health Organization spokeswoman Margaret Harris told NewsHour that the best means of containing the coronavirus wasn't shutting down borders.
What really does work well is good exit screening. So again, if you know that you've got an outbreak and you know there's an outbreak nearby, you put in good controls around and you make sure that the people who come out understand not that they're a threat, that if they do develop symptoms, they advise authorities and that they be followed through.
One other headline, the Indian capital is suffering its worst rioting for decades as violence spreads between opponents and supporters of a new citizenship law. This is Paul Henley with NewsHour, live from the BBC in London. Campaigners for free speech have condemned the sentencing to 10 years in prison of Gui Minhai, a Hong Kong book publisher who has dual Swedish citizenship. Mr. Gui was best known for releasing salacious titles about the private lives of Chinese political leaders, which angered the authorities in Beijing. Sweden has called for his release in an ongoing diplomatic row. Tianqi Martin Liao is president of the independent Chinese Pen Center and has known Gui Minhai for many years.
I'm furious and I'm very sad because I didn't expect this heavy sentence to him. As you know, Gui Minhai was arrested in 2015, so it's already 5 years that he has been kept in detention center. Even if he has been sentenced to this heavy sentence, I think 5 years has to be taken out from these 10 years. But I am afraid that would not be the case.
Tell us a little bit about the man you know.
He is a very sophisticated person and very clever. He is not a traditional way of writer. For me, he is more like a businessman. The way he writes books is in a way that very quickly he just composed a popular topic. For instance, the secret life or the secret love of the high Chinese politicians. He knows this is dangerous. He dares to do that. So he was very successful with those books because it sells really good.
What do you think a sentencing means to those in Hong Kong and in China with a key interest in freedom of expression?
I criticize it strongly. This is a dictatorship in China. They want to silence every kind of voices. You ask me, what do I think? What do I know, Gui Minhai? I told you, as a writer or as a publisher, he has composed this kind of books. But it gives no government the right to arrest him and to shut down his bookstore and put him into jail.
Will it nevertheless help silence critics of Communist Party members in China?
Of course, this way to treat him or to treat a publisher in Hong Kong will intimidate all the others. Well, since Gui Minhai's arrest in 2015, the publishing world in Hong Kong is degenerated. People don't dare to do this kind of things, to publish this kind of books or to publish critical books or any private things about Chinese politicians, about Xi Jinping. So it has threatening effect to all those who are working in this field.
That was a former colleague of Gui Minhai, president of the independent Chinese Pen Center, Tianqi Martin Liao. Someone else who's been involved in this case is Peter Dahlin, Swedish director of Safeguard Defender and formerly in charge of a small human rights organisation in Beijing. He was detained back in 2015 by the Chinese authorities after gathering information about Gui Minhai's disappearance for Sweden. He told us what happened to Mr. Gui.
In middle of October, he went missing from his vacation home in Thailand. And it would be a couple of days until it became clear that he had been kidnapped by Chinese agents and brought back to China, illegally, of course, without passing any form of immigration in Thailand or similar procedures.
What has been your involvement in this case?
Due to the limited information available as to what actually happened in Thailand, I was asked, because of my work in Beijing at the time, and because I'm also Swedish, by the Swedish government to conduct a little bit of an investigation into what had happened to him and put together any relevant information that was out there within our network. And that's what I did. And this would have happened at the very last, sort of the end of 2015.
He was told to give a statement, basically in public, a confession of guilt, wasn't he?
Well, he has given several of them, actually. He's been on TV 3 times confessing to a variety of crimes and confessing to allegations from the Chinese police, and long before any actual trial.
And that's standard practice, really?
For politically sensitive cases, for those detained that are foreigners or Chinese people that have a foreign connection, it's quite common for the Chinese state and the police to use its TV and its media to force people to confess, to attack others, to demean themselves. And many times these broadcasts, which are carried out in Europe as well, are also foreign policy statements from the Chinese side.
It's also not unusual, I imagine, that he isn't appealing against this 10-year sentence.
He is not, and that's not surprising at all. When it comes to the Chinese judicial system, the only time you really have where you could affect your own outcome is when you're detained by the police. The trial itself, the indictment, none of that really matters at all in China.
And this news is playing quite big in Sweden, is it?
It is, of course, obviously, because there's a number of issues related to the Swedish government, the fact that he's Swedish, and we're also having this issue with prosecution of the former Swedish ambassador related to this case. And of course, an interesting part is that they've claimed that he has renounced his Swedish citizenship, which is factually untrue. He has not. And they also claim that he has somehow magically gotten his Chinese citizenship back while he's being held incommunicado at a secret location, which makes very little sense from a legal point of view.
And you were detained when you investigated Mr. Gui, is that right?
Yes. Luckily, the Ministry of State Security, not the police that detained myself and many of my colleagues and also my girlfriend at the time, they were luckily unaware. I actually filed a large update on this case to the Swedish embassy the very same day that my house was raided and I was taken away. But I was kept in a similar kind of facility that we believe that Gui was kept for the first half year after he was brought back to China.
And the substance of the case against him, what do you know, for instance, about the kind of books that he sold in Hong Kong?
Well, the books themselves are mostly very gossipy titles because of the strict limitation on any kind of information in China about the leadership, about the government, about the party. Many mainland Chinese will go to Hong Kong and buy these sort of gossipy book about the leadership. But of course, that's not the real reason why he has been sentenced to 10 years in prison today.
Tell us the real reason.
Well, they claim that he has in possession state secrets and that he is sharing those with a foreign power. They're claiming that those state secrets have somehow come into his hand after he was kidnapped, which is quite ludicrous. The reality, of course, is that the kidnapping itself and the torture of him after being brought back to China, those are the state secrets that they cannot, under any circumstances, allow him to speak publicly about this. They will keep him in whatever form they need and forever how long they need to make sure that this does not come out.
That was Swedish Director of Safeguard Defender, Peter Dahlin, bringing this edition of NewsHour to a close. Thank you very much for listening. From the whole team, goodbye for now.
This is the BBC World Service, asking who will be your Women's Footballer of the Year. Vote now for the BBC Women's Footballer of the Year 2020. Is your winner England's Lucy Bronze, the USA's Julie Ertz, Australia's Sam Kerr, the Netherlands' Vivianne Miedema, or the USA's Megan Rapinoe? Go to bbc.com/women's football. Voting closes 2nd of March at 9 GMT. Terms and privacy notice are online. And in 60 minutes, OS with Luke Jones.
We are going to hear from our colleagues in BBC Arabic and from people in Egypt after the country's former autocratic president, overthrown by the 2011 Arab Spring, Hosni Mubarak, has died. Also, the story of an American couple separated by coronavirus.
People Fixing the World is next on the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
Coming up after the news, it's People Fixing the World. I'm Anissa Subedar.
And I'm Jo Mathis. This week we're talking to the founder of a little online oasis for the LGBTQ community in the Middle East.
In some places, it can be risky to talk openly online.
Every year there's more and more challenges when it comes to surveillance, censorship, abuse, and so it scares us. But then we get that email, we get the chat messages that say, this quite literally changed my life.
This woman has found a clever way of protecting her LGBTQ users, like these.
Hello, I'm bisexual from Tunisia. I'm 19. I'm very surprised that an amazing platform like this existed.
I used to struggle with depression and addiction, but after I joined the site, I met the most wonderful friends who helped me find myself again.
That's all coming up after the BBC News.
BBC News, I'm John Shea. The Indian capital Delhi is suffering its worst violence in decades as rioting between opponents and supporters of a new citizenship law spreads. The number of dead has risen to at least 10. Shops and houses have been burnt and journalists attacked. Yogita Lemerrier is in Delhi.
There was a group of people, mostly Muslims, protesting against the law that many critics see as anti-Muslims. There was a group of people, mostly Hindu, who were supporting the law. But the clashes that broke out between these two groups have increasingly become communal. And what we're seeing on the ground today very much looks like a religious riot. Where we saw violent mobs of men, there was just 2 policemen. So questions about whether the government has deployed enough police to break the cycle of violence, which has been going on for 2 days now. And all of this happening not 10 miles away from where President Trump is in the country.
Hosni Mubarak, who ruled Egypt for 3 decades, has died in a military hospital in Cairo. He was 91. Mr. Mubarak was ousted in a mass uprising in 2011. He was convicted of complicity in the killing of protesters but later cleared. Sally Nabil reports from Cairo.
Hosni Mubarak, a former commander of the Air Force, was an autocratic leader who tolerated little freedom of expression. For the West, he represented stability and was an important ally. But by 2011, many young Egyptians were fed up with political repression and took to the streets to demand freedom. After 18 days of demonstrations, Mr. Mubarak stepped aside. He was then found guilty of complicity in the killing of hundreds of protesters during the uprising.
Iran's deputy health minister, who's criticised the quarantining of people to contain the coronavirus, has himself tested positive for the disease. The official number of deaths in Iran is 15, but reports suggest the real figure may be much higher. The minister, Iraj Harirchi, gave a news conference on Monday in which he could be seen sweating and repeatedly mopping his brow. Rana Raimpour is from the BBC's Persian service.
He's the same person who said that he didn't believe in quarantine and lockdown and they were old-fashioned. What's interesting is that he has had meetings with many of the Iranian officials over the last few days. So there are now worries that maybe other politicians and ministers might be infected from him. He has posted a video in which he says that he's going to beat it. It's not the end of the world. We have to trust the Iranian politicians. But the fact is that the majority of people in the country do not trust the Iranian officials.
Hundreds of people staying in a hotel in Spain's Canary Islands have been ordered to stay in their rooms after an Italian guest tested positive for the virus. The doctor, who's on holiday in Tenerife, has been taken to hospital. This is the latest world news from the BBC. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has promised to build 3,500 new homes for Jewish settlers in a highly sensitive part of the occupied West Bank. Mr. Netanyahu said he'd given instructions to start the planning process for the work in an area known as E1 near Jerusalem. There's been strong international opposition to such a project in the past. Critics say it would cut the West Bank in two, diminishing the chances of ever creating a viable Palestinian state there. European Union ministers have approved new guidelines for negotiating a new relationship with Britain. They encompass trade, policing, criminal justice, defence and security. The guidelines contain several flashpoints, as Adam Fleming reports from Brussels.
It calls on the UK to uphold current shared standards in environmental and employment law, competition policy, subsidies for companies and international taxation, with EU regulations as a reference point. What that means exactly remains to be seen. Other areas of possible disagreement with the UK include the EU's request to continue its existing access to British fishing waters, and its desire for the European Court of Justice to retain a limited role in settling disputes where European law is concerned.
Ethiopia's health ministry has declared measles outbreaks in 30 districts, with more than 200 cases confirmed within the last week. 5 people have died since the first outbreak was confirmed. Measles cases worldwide fell significantly until 2016, but since then the infection rate has shot up. The biggest zoo in Bangladesh has confirmed that it's ended elephant rides following a campaign by animal welfare activists. The zoo in the capital Dhaka is home to 5 Asian elephants aged between 10 and 30. They'd been made to give rides to up to 1,000 people a day. The zoo says the elephants will now entertain visitors in less arduous ways, such as kicking around footballs. BBC News.
I was 19 years old and met someone online. We got chatting. He seemed like a really decent person, so we agreed to meet.
But it was a setup, and 3 other people appeared too.
One of them threatened me that if I didn't give them my PIN code, they would bury me with the others in the yard. I was terrified. They would call my family and tell them I was gay. And I thought about suicide.
If you're LGBTQ, lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans or queer in the Middle East, making friends online can be risky business. But if you know where to look, there's a little oasis.
Even if you have no personal support, find your support here on Ahwa. The vast majority of people on here are sweet and kind and want to be supportive.
Ahwa is a website for LGBTQ people in the Middle East.
The reason why Ahwa has been successful is because it is homegrown. It's local. People know that it's founded in Bahrain, that it's founded by an Arab LGBTQ community, that it's run by people who understand the challenges, who themselves take the risks.
And there's a clever way they're keeping safe, weeding out trolls and unwanted intruders.
People fixing the world.
Hello and welcome to People Fixing the World from the BBC World Service, the programme where we hear from people with interesting ways of solving problems. I'm Jo Mathis.
And I'm Anissa Subidar. Now, being LGBTQ in the Middle East can put you in danger. And this week's solution is all about a safe place online for people in these communities, a place where they can be themselves. Stay with us to the end of the programme when we'll be sharing a few tips for staying safe on the internet.
First, have a listen to these web posts.
Hello, I'm bisexual from Tunisia. I'm 19. I'm very surprised that an amazing platform like this existed, and I hope I can make some friends here and express myself in a safe environment.
Whenever I pray, I start thinking about things I've done, like watching lesbian porn, fantasizing about my crush, or thinking about what I feel deep down inside me. That makes me ashamed of myself. For me, being bi and Muslim is a paradox. My brain cannot grasp both concepts at the same time.
I used to struggle with depression and addiction, but after I joined the site, I met the most wonderful friends who helped me find myself again.
They're on a website called Ahwa, the Arabic word for passions. People openly chat about very intimate things, marriages of convenience, sex, even conversion therapy.
The community are clearly supportive. But why is it a big deal, you might be wondering? Here's why.
The story you're about to hear is read by an actor. It happened in Egypt, where there are very few gay-friendly bars or support groups. Gatherings are often held in people's homes and are invite-only. Dating apps have become the easiest way to meet people, but they can be risky.
I was 19 years old and met someone online. We got chatting. He seemed like a really decent person, so we agreed to meet. We walked around a bit and we talked a lot. And he took me to this area where there was a villa under construction still, with high fences and a gate. He had a bed ready. We had barely started to do anything. Then suddenly the door opened and 3 people stormed inside. They took my clothes, so I wouldn't have a chance to run. And they beat me and they took my wallet. There was money in it and 2 bank cards. One was mine and the other was my father's. One of them put a knife against my neck and threatened me that if I didn't give them my PIN code, they would slit my throat and bury me with the others in the yard. One of them took the cards and went to withdraw the money. When they had done that, they let me get dressed and they threatened me again and made me run until I get to the main road. I was begging strangers for money to cover a bus fare and I left. I was terrified. They would call my family and tell them I was gay. And I thought about suicide.
This isn't an isolated case. Blackmailing LGBTQ people is relatively common in certain parts of the world. The blackmailers knew this young man wouldn't go to the police. There was a big chance they'd tell his family he was gay, or worse, arrest him. The authorities in Egypt have been using a 1960s debauchery law to prosecute LGBTQ people for years, and human rights groups say the police use dating apps to entrap people.
The fears and reservations of being exposed or coming out to your family are recurring themes in LGBTQ communities, and especially in some Middle Eastern countries. I spoke to Egyptian model and Instagram influencer Mina Gerges, who now lives in Canada, and he told me what it was like coming out to his parents.
My entire life, I was told that you can't be gay and you can't be Arab. So this conversation, I remember, was extremely difficult and traumatic for me because I wanted to say I am gay, but there was no word for I am gay in Arabic that was positive. I did a lot of research because I always wanted to equip myself with the skills and the language to be able to communicate to people from my culture that I was gay. So I remember being in this conversation with my parents and saying, Mom, Dad, I am gay. And my mom being like, gay, what does that mean?
There is some evidence of a wider, growing visibility when you're LGBTQ in the Middle East.
My name is Hadi Damian. I'm the initiator of Beirut Pride, and also I'm its lead organizer.
Lebanon is home to the first ever Pride Festival in the Arab world, which started in 2017.
Very happy to be here with you all. Thank you for being the essence of the Beirut Pride. Cheers.
The following year, in 2018, on the 3rd day of Beirut Pride, the police were called in and Hadi was arrested. The rest of the week had to be cancelled. Hadi and the rest of the organisers have continued to hold the festival every year since then. But it's not easy.
Lebanese authorities still interpret articles from the criminal code to criminalize homosexuality and homosexuals. And this is why decriminalization of homosexuality is paramount, and why it is our utmost goal in Beirut Pride and in the outreach that we do. So all countries have quite a lot of work to do, especially to avoid having advancements rolled back. And we should never take improvement for granted and for definite.
When you're up against all of this, discovering your own sexual orientation and identity, it's hard to find anyone to talk to. People often turn to the internet, but then they don't necessarily know how to do that safely or who to trust. Ahwa's founder knows this only too well.
Every year, there's more and more challenges when it comes to surveillance, censorship, abuse, people being imprisoned. And so it scares us. Sometimes we think maybe the best thing for our community is to actually shut down. But then we get that email, we get the chat messages that say, this quite literally changed my life and changed my perception about who I am.
We're not using her name. Being careful what she says in public and to who is one of many precautions this woman takes to keep the whole operation safe.
Ahwa's founder taught herself to code so she could set up the site. It's been running for over 10 years now, and she says that as far as she knows, no one has come to any harm from using it.
And while some LGBTQ websites attract a lot of trolls and unwanted intruders, Ahwa has found a clever way to put them off.
The website is based on the same mechanics used in gaming. Imagine playing the kind of video game where you have to pass a level before you can progress to the next one. As you climb through each level, more rewards are unlocked.
And Ahwa runs on the same principles. If you post supportive comments, start discussions which other users like or share, and generally behave like a good citizen, you get points. The more points you get, the more you are trusted, and the more other users are likely to help you out.
But if you post a nasty comment, other users can flag it and you lose points. If a comment gets flagged more than 5 times, it's hidden from public view. It effectively disappears.
The gamification system is incredibly critical to Ahwa because without it, we just have trolls everywhere. We wanted to turn that around and make it exhausting for the trolls.
Everyone uses the site anonymously. When you sign up, you pick an avatar and an anonymous username. But many newcomers lurk, sometimes for years, before they pluck up the courage to post. Here's the story of one user.
Ahwa did end up changing my life, big time.
She's from a Gulf state and she's in her early 30s. This isn't her real voice.
I'll be honest, I didn't actually start questioning my sexuality until I was presented with Ahwa.
A college friend introduced her to it.
She wanted to come out to me, and she was doing that by showing Ahwa to me and saying, "Look at this, read this, what do you think?" And to me, I was scared. I didn't want to face it. It was dirty. It was supposed to be a fetish. It was disgusting. She kept pushing me to look at this website anyway. I think she just wanted me to accept her. But in doing that, I began to accept myself. And it was scary because there were all these people telling their coming out stories and saying how they used to feel. And I was thinking, oh my God, this sounds creepily familiar. Is this the one thing I could never explain about myself?
After a while, she did start to post, and she eventually became active on the site and now volunteers as a moderator.
Her story shows why Ahwa is designed to be so open on the first level. There are 3 levels in all. New users have to contribute for a long time to earn access to all of them.
When I first looked at Ahwa and was reading intimate posts about sex and coming out letters, I wondered what could possibly be on level 3. I asked if I could take a look at the 3rd and innermost level, but there wasn't a shortcut. I'd have had to do it the same way as everyone else, by engaging and building up trust for months.
With that level of commitment to the platform, you end up being rewarded by having a tremendous amount of access to legal or some medical or even counseling resources that other newcomers would, for example, not have access to.
These professional contacts are precious. They can be very hard to come by.
Before we connect them with anybody, we tell them this is the user, here's their contributions, here's the level that they have reached. It's up to you whether or not you feel that this is a person who is genuine.
Keeping Ahwa up and running safely is about much more than the software and the system, though. It's a carefully judged balancing act. How do you keep yourself safe?
I really try to walk on eggshells. So it's really about watching my footsteps and making sure that I don't get too comfortable and that I practice self-censorship.
So you're constantly walking a series of tightropes, aren't you, really?
Yes, absolutely. Because also I don't want to encourage other people to hack the platform or to feel that I am encroaching on something political, for example. Because for us, this is really a social justice. We're not calling for the downfall of a regime or something like that. And so
you're quite careful to keep it non-political, aren't you?
Exactly. I mean, in the end, our very existence is political. But how much in the front line do you really have to be? And I made the conscious decision to be in the background.
Are you pretty confident then that the authorities do know about you?
Oh, I don't doubt that they do, yeah. But it's not on the priority list for now.
While the site offers emotional support, it can't fulfill every need.
Ahwa isn't a dating app. It's a discussion forum. And it's an important difference.
Afsana Rigo is originally from Iran.
She's researched the risks the LGBTQ community face online in the Middle Eastern region for Harvard University and Article 19, an international human rights organisation.
Why does it matter that it's not a dating app? Does it matter that it's not a dating app?
Yeah, I mean, I can't think of any other tool rather than dating apps that are so linked intimately within our most fragile and vulnerable parts of our sexuality and identity. And they're so important within the community because of that function. And discussion forums provide a very different purpose. You might be going on there to look for more information about your identity. You might be going there to find more people to talk to. But you might not go on there and say, hey, I just want someone to spend a good night with. Yeah. So they're different purposes, all very important.
So while she